If you're responsible for a PA, you want it to sound good. You know that you should tune your PA, but you're unsure about what to do to actually get those speakers sounding their best. To get sound to everyone, you need to choose the right speakers. To get even coverage, you need to place those speakers correctly. To get smooth sound, you need to EQ your whole speaker system. And to make them play nicely together, you need to balance levels and time align them. That might seem like a lot, but I'm going to share a simple-ish framework to get your speakers sounding great. You will of course be using your ears, but we'll also be using data to remove any guesswork. If you're not feeling confident in EQing by ear, then you can check out the free EQ guide in the description below. If you've never done anything like this before, the important thing is to get started. Because the quicker you start trying to tune your PA system properly, the quicker you will learn how to do it quickly. I'm going to give you a bunch of the theory, which is very, very important first, and then we'll get into the practical explanation, okay? So stick with me, or if you think you know all this, hop over it and see if you understand. I'll leave a timestamp so that you can get to the juicy bit if you want. Let's dive in. Okay, the first thing that we need to do is we need to cover everyone, right? And to cover everyone, we need to decide who everyone is. We need to define our listening area, because the listening area is not necessarily the entire venue, is it? If you think that there's a space at the back where people are queuing to go to the toilet, then that's not actually part of our listening area. We're not strictly trying to get the best listening experience to those people because they are not currently actively engaged watching the show. We want to look at the venue and decide where people are that we want to actively cover them, and we're going to optimize our speakers and our placement for that area. The aim is to give everyone in the listening area a great show, and to do that, speaker placement is king. It is the most important thing. A quick rule of thumb is if you're standing somewhere in the listening area and you can't really look into a speaker, you're probably not being covered by that speaker. So to ensure that we are positioning our speakers as effectively as possible, we're going to divide up the listening area, right? And you can do this by getting a little bit of paper, and making a sketch, or you can just do it in your head by looking at the area and thinking, okay, this is what the area looks like. What speakers do I have? You're probably starting with 2. And then you want to divide that area in 2. And you want to place each of those speakers playing directly into the center of each of those areas, right? So you take area 1, you pop your speaker on a stand or you fly it from wherever it's going, and you make sure that it is pointed dead center at the center of its half of the listening area. Michael Lawrence talks in his book about giving the speaker custody of an area. And in that area, it's just that one speaker that is responsible for delivering sound to that area. Check in the description below for a link for the book, which I highly recommend reading. Now, there's an additional problem here. All speakers are not made equal, right? And they have what we call coverage characteristics, or a coverage angle. Basically, a coverage angle is the area in front of that speaker where the speaker performs as intended, where you get the desired SPL, so volume, and frequency response. So inside this coverage area, we hear the speaker as intended. If we step outside of that coverage area, the listening experience changes. So you're probably imagining that you lose volume when you step outside of that coverage area, which is kind of true, but you don't lose volume equally across the frequency spectrum, right? As you move outside of that coverage area, you're going to experience the high frequencies dropping off disproportionately to the low frequencies. And you'll get a sort of roll off. Things will get dull, they won't be as bright, you won't have as much high frequency content as you expected. Now we know this intuitively, right? If you stand behind a speaker, obviously it is 1, quieter, but 2, very bassy and not very clear. That's because you are not obviously in the coverage angle of the speaker. As you move further and further away from the speaker, you're actually going to lose not just volume, but you're going to disproportionately lose high frequency as well, right? So after a certain distance, your speaker is not going to sound the way that you want it to. And this is a sliding scale, it's not absolutes, right? If it's a 90-degree coverage angle and you're more than 45 degrees off to the left, you're not going to suddenly lose half the volume and all of the high frequency, right? The further you go outside of the coverage area, the less clear that speaker is going to sound, and the less it's going to sound as you intend it. So when you position these speakers and you point them in the center of their area of custody, that is the area of the venue where they are solely responsible for recreating the sound, you need to be aware of this coverage angle, right? Because there will come a point where that speaker is no longer covering the area as intended. Now, if you have a coverage area and you have 2 speakers and they both have 90-degree angles, you'll notice that there is a big old gap in the middle, right? Where we are not covering the audience area ideally. So what do we do then? When part of our listening area is outside of our speaker coverage, we need to use another speaker to fill in the sound in that area, right? Because remember, in that area, it's not devoid of sound, it's just somewhat devoid of high frequency content. It doesn't sound how we want it to, and we are aiming to give every single listener a great experience, even the people down the front and the people at the sides. You may have guessed at this point that any speaker that we place in these areas to fill and restore our ideal frequency response, restore the listening experience to how we intend it to be, we call those fill speakers, right? You've probably heard of front fill speakers, you've probably heard of delay fill speakers. So front fills fill the gap at the front, that is, the gap in between the two speakers at the front of the venue. Delay fill speakers fill further back in the venue. So let's talk about the front fill speaker for a second. What happens when you go off axis from the speaker? You lose a bit of volume, but you lose a lot of clarity, a lot of top end, right? So if you're standing in the gap at the front, in the middle of these two main speakers, then you're still going to be hearing a lot of volume because you're quite close to the speakers, but you're going to be hearing a very dull sound. You won't have clarity. So the purpose of our front fill speaker is actually to replace the clarity. And so let's think about the delay speakers again, right? As we move back through the venue, as we get further away from all of our speakers, we disproportionately lose high frequencies. So the purpose of these delay fills then is the exact same as the front fill. It is to add back in that high frequency content so the people at the back also get a nice, clear, full frequency range listening experience. So we need to have even volume front to back, and we need to have even frequency response front to back. How do we get the volume even first? One super easy thing that we can do is raise the speakers higher up. If you draw out your little venue, right, and you draw the front row and the back row, and you need to have the same listening experience at the front row and the back row, the only logical thing to do would be to have the same distance from the speaker at the front row and the back row. Where would you put that speaker to achieve that? You would either need to put it in the center of the audience, very impractical because it only plays one way, or you would need to put it in the roof playing down the way. Also very impractical, lots of feedback, etc. But you see that by being in the roof, it is closer to the back row and the front row. If we still raise it really, really high up, but have it next to the stage, then what we've done is we've increased the distance from the front row, but the distance from the back row is still kind of negligible, right? So now we can just turn the volume up to restore the back row back to our desired volume, but by doing so, we're actually punishing the front row a little bit less. So let's talk about frequency. Raising the speaker up actually helps combat the high frequency loss for the people at the back, because we're no longer playing the speakers into a wall of people. If you've ever mixed in a little basement, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You stand at the back in a sold out gig and you hear basically nothing but bass. It's a nightmare. So we want to get it high up. But of course, the problem is if you're in that basement, you can't actually go much higher. Maybe it's like 2 meters or like 6 foot or something, 10 feet high. I don't know. But you can only raise the speaker so high, right? The limits are not infinite. They're usually defined by the ceiling height of your venue. And that's where fills come in, right? As I said earlier, we use fills to restore the frequency and the volume coverage that we want in an area where it is currently not what we want. So if the speakers are wide apart and there's a gap in the center, we use a front fill. If the venue is very, very long and we're getting a lot of high frequency drop off, we use delay fills. Also, if the venue has some sort of architectural feature, which makes frequency coverage or volume coverage a bit weird, we also use films. There's a venue I work in that has loads of big marble pillars right in the middle of it. You don't hear a lot behind those pillars, so there are fill speakers behind each of the pillars to restore the area behind the pillars back to our sort of intended volume and frequency response target-ish. Obviously, people standing behind the pillars aren't actually seeing the gig. So big picture, we want great sound everywhere. We want it to be ish the same volume from front to back, and we want it to be ish the same frequency response from front to back. By ish, I mean plus minus 3 decibels from the center, a maximum variation of 6 dB. 2 speakers can only cover so much. It's not magic, so we use extra speakers, fills, to fill in any area which is not covered by those speakers because it is either off axis or too far away. And we use those films to restore that area back to our intended sort of frequency response and volume level. Got it? Right, let's get practical. Okay, so we're on to the second main part of this whole system tuning thing. And in this part, we're going to verify that all of our speakers are working as we intend them to. We're going to EQ them and set the levels. So the first thing we need to do is we need to verify them, right? We need to ensure that every single speaker in our system is working correctly. So this is pretty easy, right? We basically just send pink noise or music, something familiar, to each and every speaker in our system, one by one. Listen to each speaker, make sure it's not missing a high frequency driver or the woofer's not blown or something like that. Just make sure that every single one of them sounds full and complete. Again, check out the guide if you're not comfortable EQing by ear. The next bit is going to be setting the level in the EQ, and we could do this by ear. You could walk around each zone and just listen to the speaker and say, does this speaker sound like the last speaker? You could walk between the zones and say, is this zone louder than this zone? But what we're going to do is we're going to use data, and we're going to hold ourselves to a set of standards so that we know that our speaker system is performing within, a certain tolerance. To do that, I'm going to show you using Smart. You could use Open Sound Meter. I'll give you a little bit of a tutorial on how you set that up, but if anything's unclear, I'm sure you can read the manual or Google or YouTube how to set up Smart. We're going to again divide and conquer. We're going to listen to our main system first and then deal with the subsystems, that is the fills. And if you don't have any subsystems, then this will just be your whole PA. And before we start this, just make sure that every speaker or amplifier, whatever, is set to 0, that there's no attenuation when you're going into the speaker. First, let's set up Smart, right? So you're going to open up Smart, and it's going to look however it looks, but if you don't have a transfer function, you need to create a new transfer function engine. Once you create your transfer function, you can double click on it, go in here, make sure that you've got your audio device connected up and you've got your microphone connected into input 1. And then obviously make sure the audio device is connected out to the mixer or to the speakers or wherever you're running it, to your system processor. Your reference signal over here, you want to select loopback, the Smart loopback output 1. And that's so that when you turn on your noise generator, it feeds it directly back into this transfer function. So that's looking good. We can close that. You can obviously label this whatever you want. I've called it PA. So your microphone's connected to input 1 on your interface, and you want to put it in the center of the coverage area of main left, your main PA system left speaker. And remember, this is the center of the listening area, the desired coverage area of that particular speaker. Not the whole area, but just the area that this speaker is intending to cover. Once your mic's there, you can gain it up, apply phantom if you need to, gain it up about 40 or 50 decibels. You want it nice and hot. That's basically nearly full on my interface. You want to go down to your signal generator, and we want to set this to be about -12. And we want to make sure that our monitor output on our interface is turned up so that we are sending this audio into our speaker processor, into our mixer, however we are distributing the noise to the speaker. So I'm going to turn this generator on now, and what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the gain of the microphone to be the same as the reference input. So if I mute this first of all, right, I'm going to turn this generator on, I'm going to turn my measurement on, and you see that I've got the input here, and you can see this is my voice playing here. I'm going to unmute the output, and I'm just going to adjust the volume so that I have the same coming in my measurement as I do as my reference. I want these two to be equal. Okay, and once I do that, you can see that I have my magnitude trace here, and this is what we're going to care about. Once we've set these levels, we also need to find the delay time. You can just click here when that's running to apply the correct delay compensation so your measurement makes sense. The last thing we might want to do is we apply averaging to make this measurement more stable. If there's no averaging, it shows us more of an instantaneous measurement. We are more interested in a general picture of how the sound system sounds. So I'll show you that. So you see that is nice and stable. So we are going to focus in this section on this magnitude trace, right? And that is going to show us the volume of the speaker that we are measuring in the space where we have measured it, and also the frequency response of that speaker. Does it have a bump in the high end? Does it have a dip in the low end? Those kind of things are going to be shown in this magnitude graph. If it was totally flat, that would mean the exact same thing came out of the speaker as went into it, exact same volume, exact same frequency response. Very unlikely to happen due to how sound moves in a room. Now, you might think that we are going to aim for a flat frequency response, that we want everything to be as close to this line as possible, but that's not actually the case. Humans tend to dislike the sound of a flat frequency response. Actually, we quite like a little bit of a dip in the high end and a bit of a boost in the low end. How much of a boost, how much of a dip, is kind of up to you, but what we're going to do is we're going to use a target trace to guide us. So I've got some here that I got from, I think, Michael Lawrence, maybe Michael Curtis. I will write here who it actually was. And so you can just drag that into Smart, and then you can turn it on. And that's just something to aim for. It doesn't need to be strictly that. This is just a good starting point. You could make your own target trace. You might only want a 3 decibel boost in your low end. You might not want to roll off the high end. That's something you'll learn through experience and through doing it over and over and over again. So my advice would be to follow this target trace or whatever target trace you have until you decide that there's something you don't like about it. And then make your own. You can Google it, find a video how to do that. So now we're going to take some action. Our microphone is on axis of the speaker, is directly in the center of the area that the speaker is covering, pointed at the speaker. We're going to play the pink noise through it, and we're going to take that measurement. Then we're going to apply EQ to that output using whatever you're going through, if it's matrix outputs on your mixer, or if it's a system processor that you have, or if it's just the DSP on the back of the speaker. Now it's time to apply the EQ. So you would apply that EQ and then save it again so that it's in line with your target curve. After that, you would move your microphone to the front of the listening area. So that is the front of where you're intending that left main speaker to cover. And then you would start your measurement again, apply delay compensation again, and then take that measurement. Then you'd move the microphone to the back of the listening area, the furthest point that you intend that speaker to cover, and you would do the same thing. Apply delay compensation, take the measurement again. Now you've got 3 measurements, right? In the center of your coverage area, at the front of your coverage area, and at the back of your coverage area. And we're going to look at this graph now, and we want to make sure that those 3 measurements are within 6 decibels of each other. The center one is our North Star, and our measurement at the front shouldn't be more than 3 decibels higher across the whole frequency spectrum. And our measurement at the back shouldn't be more than 3 decibels lower across the whole frequency spectrum. After that, if you've got a sub, it's time to add it in. Move your microphone back into the center, start the measurement again, time align yourself again to the center, and then turn your sub on. Double check your magnitude trace to see how far away you are from your intended level. If you need more sub, turn the sub output up. If you need less sub, turn the sub output down. If you suddenly have too much at 120 Hertz, try EQing a little bit of that out on the mains or on the sub. After that, it's time to deal with the fills. So mute all of those outputs again, move your microphone into the center of the area that you intend to cover with the fill. Now, repeat the process. Send the pink noise out of the output, apply the delay compensation to get a coherent measurement, and double check the magnitude response. You might need to turn that speaker up or turn that speaker down to get the magnitude response to be at 0 again, to reference it to that center measurement in your main PA coverage zone. You also might need to apply some EQ to roll off any high end or increase any low end to get to that target trace. Don't worry too much about the low end because so much of the low end from the mains will spill into that area. You could even turn your mains on at that point and see how they interact together. Now you're going to do the exact same thing for any delay speakers that you have. Turn off the rest of the PA, place the microphone in the center of the coverage zone and measure, apply level changes and EQ changes to reach that target curve in that zone. Because remember, each speaker is responsible for its own zone within our listening area. A couple of things to remember before we move on to time aligning. Don't adjust the gain on the mic or the output on your interface or anything that might interfere with the level differences in the measurements, because you need to know how much quieter or louder it is from the front to the back. If you're at the back of the room and you find that you've got too much noise in the microphone, you can turn the signal generator up on the software. Because we linked the gain level of these two at the start, then as we increase the generator, the two of these will remain at the same level. And another thing to remember is if your system is symmetrical, you only need to do one side of it because you've verified that all the speakers sound the way they should. So if you just do the whole left-hand side, you can just copy and paste the settings to the right-hand side before you do a final check. Let's move on and talk about time aligning all of these components so that they all play together properly. All the sounds from all the different speakers are reaching different points of the room at different times, which means that there can be a sort of phase interference, which causes dropouts in certain frequency ranges, phasing, that sort of thing. Doesn't sound great. The important thing to remember is that any number of sources, so front fills and mains, for example, or mains and subs, can only be in time at one point, right? Because they come from 2 different points in time. There is only one place in the room where they are equidistant. If you align them there, and you step 1 meter to the left, they will be out of time again. So you need to choose where you want them to be in time. We're going to spend a little bit of time looking at the impulse response and the phase graph in Smart now, so buckle up. Let's talk about the subs. This is the big one, right? Everyone wants to know how you time align your subs, but it's not such a big deal, to be honest, because they're only time aligned in one place. So let's time align them in one place. Michael Curtis recommends doing it about 75% of the way back in the listening area. That's where we're going to pop our microphone. It's difficult for software like Smart to lock on to sort of the arrival time of a sub. So what we'll do is we'll just align to the main. So make sure your sub is off, turn your main on, make sure that your measurement is turned on, and make sure that you apply your delay compensation. Now save that. Now you can turn off the main left speaker and you can turn on your sub, and you'll see the phase response of the sub at that point in the room. You can save that now. So first of all, we need to identify where they are similar in level. To do that, we just look at the magnitude graph, and you can see that this green line, which is the sub, overlaps the orange line, which is the main here. So we just look at the same area on the phase graph, and you see that the green and the orange line are not overlapping, which means they are not in time. Now, if we apply delay, what happens is whatever line we apply delay to will tilt down the way. So we can apply delay to our subwoofer, shown here in blue, and as we apply the delay, it tilts down until it reaches the orange line, which is the mains. And so when those two are as close as possible, then your main and your sub are time aligned. So you can use your mixer, you can use your DSP, or you can just use whatever DSP is built in the back of your subs or your mains to adjust them so that they are time aligned. Let's chat about time aligning the fills then. This is actually probably more important than time aligning the sub. We need to find the point where they are the same volume. Because again, remember, if we're standing mostly in the spill area of the front fill, we're just going to hear the front fill. We actually don't hear that much of the mains because the front fill is more than 6 decibels louder than the mains. Similarly, if we're in front of the mains, we don't care about the front fill. So we find the point where they overlap. I think Michael Lawrence calls this the seam, the point where the two sound sources interact the most. And to do this, we're just going to use our ears. We're just going to walk the line in front of the stage in between the coverage area of those two speakers. And you're going to listen and you're going to try and find where it sounds most phasey. So as you play the pink noise and you walk the line, you will hear the two start to interact with each other and they'll start going. And when you hear that most interference, that's when you want to put your microphone down there. So when you're running your noise now, what we're going to do is we're going to use the impulse response in Smart to time align these. So if you look at the impulse response, you'll see there's this blip in the center, and that's what you're aligned to, right? And it's probably going to be your mains. And then you'll see another smaller blip slightly behind it, and that's probably going to be your fills because your fills are arriving before your mains. All you need to do is look at this impulse response graph, right? And you'll see there's time at the bottom here. There's also time displayed on the top here when I'm highlighted over something. Find that other blip, and then you just apply that amount of delay. And you take your measurement again, and you'll see that the two blips have become one. They are arriving at the same time. And it's as easy as that. And you just repeat that process with your delay fills, or in fact, any fill speakers that you want. You're aligning them to the mains. The mains are covering most of the area, and you're using these fills to support in a certain area. So your fills report back to your mains, and you time align them at the point where they interact the most, which is the point where they are both a similar volume. You find that by using your ears. If you don't trust your ears, get the EQ. If you've got more in-depth questions about this, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I'll leave a video up here which is probably relevant to this video. I can't think of one right now. That's all for now. Goodbye.